welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode 84 for May 28th, 2010. This is Dr. Rachie with you today, filling in for Richard Saunders, who's pretty under the weather this week. Richard's had a cold for a few days, which has now turned into some kind of laryngitis, so he's sounding like a very croaky person right now. And then yesterday, he thinks he may have broken his toe. So as we speak, Richard is at the doctor's waiting for the verdict. So we hope he gets better soon. But on to this week's show. This week, our reporter Kylie Sturgis has an interview with Warren Bonnet, who runs a skeptical and scientific bookshop called Embiggen Books. Warren also hosts lectures and talks and recently hosted the Nobel Prize-winning immunologist Professor Peter Doherty. So we look forward to that interview. This is followed by Dr. Rachie Reports, where I summarise the events leading up to Andrew Wakefield getting struck off the medical register in the UK last Tuesday. So sit back, listeners, send your healing energies to Richard and enjoy this week's Skeptic Zone.
I'm Kylie Sturgis, and I'm talking to Warren Bonnet. Warren Bonnet is the creator of the Embiggen Bookstore, a store located in Noosaville in Queensland, in the northeast of Australia. What makes Embiggen Bookstore different is that it is devoted to selling and promoting rationalism and science through its store. Warren is a regular feature on the Token Skeptic podcast as a book reviewer, and as an active skeptic, you can see many of the lectures that he holds in his store promoted on his website.
Thank you very much for joining me, Warren. First of all, what did you do before you owned a bookstore?
Wow, that's an immense variety of stuff.
Right.
I'm a graphic designer. That's something I've been doing for quite a long time. But over the course of my years since leaving university, I've done everything from a whole variety of salesman, book designer, cook, waiter, barman, teacher, legal clerk, veterinary assistant, and I spent a year and a half riding my push bike around Australia.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And so what led to the creation of the Embiggen Bookstore? I mean, that is, after all, a reference to a Simpsons joke, isn't it?
It is, yes. The joke being that a noble spirit embiggens even the smallest man. It was a show which was exploring the nature of language and how urban myths develop, and Lisa Simpson wanting to get to the truth. And that episode wasn't really what made the word come to mind for us. It was actually the word embiggen turning up in a string theory paper, a noble spirit, where he says the D-brain embiggens into an E-brain. And the reviewer of that, the peer reviewer, wrote that he thought it was a perfectly cromulent idea, which is another Simpsons word. So that was pretty good. But the thing that led to the creation of the store was it's really been a very, very long time coming. At university, I studied, a very long time ago, a whole variety of different philosophers and ethicists, and it started to dawn on me that I would like to do something that was positive in contribution to a variety of problems that the world seems to have, or humanity seems to at least engage with, and I wasn't really sure how to go about doing that. And that actually led to me having a whole variety of jobs, believe it or not, because I was quite interested in not just being an academic, in trying to get out there and see what people thought and how they felt about stuff. And so, after leaving my environmental ethics course, I found people in my first job, which was working in corporate affairs in Victoria, which is a government body. I met people that had never heard of the ozone layer.
Wow.
And this was at the time when the hole in the ozone layer had effectively just been announced and it was all over the news. And I met people that had never heard of the ozone layer, and that's when I knew that the problem was going to be a lot bigger than I thought, because it wasn't just dealing with specific problems, it was dealing with a huge amount of not just ignorance. In fact, ignorance is really the wrong word. It's just a lack of engagement in things to do with, say, democracy, for instance. You know, people are voting on issues frequently that they're completely uneducated on, which to me undermines democracy. Democracy requires an educated populace, in my opinion, and if you don't have it, then the votes are somewhat compromised. And so we're having people who are in voting positions who were voting for governments that were going to have policies on dealing with the ozone layer, and yet the people didn't know what the ozone layer even was. So many, many years later, after lots of different ways of trying to look at the problem, I really thought that a bookstore that didn't require people to join an organisation, to become an ISM or an IST or anything like that, if a bookstore stopped offering all of the irrational stuff and only offered mostly rational material, then anyone could engage with the material without joining anything. They could simply walk into a bookstore and they would find, like in our shop, you walk in the door and you're faced with 3,000 science books.
Wonderful.
As soon as you walk in the door. And that's really been the goal, is to make something that hopefully will work as a business model. We haven't really proved that yet, but it's slowly getting there. But if it does work, it means we could set up these little rational bastions around the cities and then conduct science talks and philosophy talks in them as a matter of course, which is what we do.
Now, why in Queensland rather than Victoria? You said that you first learned about people's lack of knowledge about the ozone layer when you were in Victoria. Why choose Queensland?
Queensland was kind of chosen for me, really.
Oh.
I was living in the UK, in London, for 20 years, and I worked mostly as a designer there, but a whole variety of other things. And my best friend in Australia, Kirsty Bruce, was working in the film industry, and she bought a house in Queensland on the Sunshine Coast. And when I came back, I went to visit Kirsty as my best friend, and then we kissed.
Oh,
and that's it. And then I stayed. So then we were both still freelancing at the time, and we wanted to try and find a way to make things work here, and that's when the bookshop really came to the fore and thought, oh, well, let's try and do it here. And that's what we've done. We've literally sunk everything we can into making it work, just try and make as big an impact as we can.
I've recently read on Facebook, Warren, a situation where an uncle was criticised for giving Daniel Loxton's evolution book to his nieces. Do you have any advice on how to handle situations like that, where people might like to encourage reading on rationalism and science, but they know that there's going to be opposition?
Yeah, it's something I do come across from time to time, and there's no one blanket book to be able to hand out to everyone in every situation, because everyone has their own sort of tentativeness. But I tend to suggest start with things that are off topic. Don't go. Stay general. Stay with things that are to do with critical thinking. Start at the basis.
Yeah.
Don't start with subjects like, say, evolution, because that can open up a lot of other things at the same time, and that'll prevent any critical engagement with the subject at all. So I would tend to start with just thought. Let's start with thinking. So things like Phil Camp's books, or if they're for kids, or if they're not for kids, things like Crimes Against Logic by Jamie White, or Demon Haunted World, the absolute classic. I mean, they're not specifically attacking any particular issue, other than the way people think about things. And so I think that's the best place to start on any of those sorts of things. if the adult is that they're giving them to, or if they've come in themselves and have made a few inquiries about things that you think they might be open to something a little bit more, then you could go more direct. For instance, I had some women come into the shop at one point who, and we were having a Charles Darwin day, and they said, "Oh, what are you doing that for? Wasn't he like one of the most evil men in history?"
Wow.
And these were university-educated, 40-something women, not religious particularly. One of them was married to a religious person, but no real religiosity there. But they just simply had this misconception. So I simply handed them a biography of Charles Darwin, which they both devoured within 24 hours, and now they run a local sort of non-fiction book club meet-up between women, and they've also now recently bought Christopher Hitchens' book, God Is Not Great, and a variety of others, and they're amazing. They just come in and they devour things now. It's wonderful.
That raises my next question. Do you have a cafe attached to your bookstore?
No, there's one next door to us called Organica. Organica is they're staffed by really lovely people, and they do deal with a few problematic items, such as, say, things like homeopathic remedies and ear candling stuff, and all that gumph, and it causes us a fairly high degree of heartache. Because they're just not engaged in the material. They don't want to be engaged in the material, really, and they're running a business. They're giving people what they want in that arena. So people who are into organic food also tend to head towards things like that, apparently. So, in fact, we frequently get people who stop there to eat and drink, come next door expecting to find a spiritual New Age bookshop.
Wow.
And one person in particular actually got angry that we weren't. and it's a bit misleading being next to Organica like that, don't you think?
Yeah.
As they walked out, the woman turned to the man and said, "Oh, it's one of those bookshops."
Ooh.
I have no idea what that means, but clearly she did. So, and they walk past about once or twice a week to go for coffee, and every time I catch them walking past the window, they can't see in, but I can see out. They're sort of peering into the shop with a bit of a snarl on their face, so it's quite amusing, really.
Well, you never know. Maybe one day they'll come back in again to give a piece of their mind as they go off to have another piece of cake, and perhaps you might be able to get some dialogue happening. Yeah,
well, I have done with a few, but there are some people who do seem to be a little bit beyond it. There's a lot of anti-vaxxers that go there, and they come in here and have a bit of an argument from time to time, and look at our medical section on the shelf and see people like Paul Offit and Simon Singh and say, well, what about the other side of the argument? And I said, well, that's really politics. It's not science. This is a science bookshop. Just try and contain it that way. Just say, look, there's no science that's really coming out against this in the way that you think it is. So I need to stock science books. That's what that section is.
So that brings me to my next question, which is, what's it like in the region where your bookstore is? You've already started to give a hint with clues about the anti-vaccination crowd in the region of Queensland where you are.
Yeah, it really is a bit of a mixture. There's a small community of people who are very actively engaged in intellectual life, and there's a crossover between them and the more spiritual New Agey kind that meet in the middle where the environmentalists inhabit. I would be classified as an environmentalist. I was trained in environmental ethics and outdoor education initially, so I've got a background in that. And a lot of that area is actually caught up in quite a lot of misinformation about the world. Nature is good, nature is wonderful, nature will provide, nature is the best thing that ever happened, and therefore natural products are good. And so you get a lot of anti-science people in the environment movement. And so the intellectuals on one side, environmentalists in the middle, complete woo-woos on the other, and bang in the middle of the environmentalists. Now, on the woo side, we have practitioners of Gerson therapy here, which is a spectacularly debunked range of therapies for cancers.
Oh, wow.
There are coffee enemas. Courses in quantum consciousness. There are psychic hairdressers.
Oh, that would be fascinating. What do they do?
I don't know. But at one point, when the economic crisis hit, they did put a sign in their window saying, I think it was one way or the other, it was either free psychic reading with every haircut or free haircut with every psychic reading. I can't remember which way it went, but
wow.
Quite amusing. Yeah. There are aura comas. There are Reiki masters. We have them coming in the shop from time to time, and we also have people who are led to their shop by their intuitive spirit guides.
Oh.
Which, all that intuitive if they're walking in there trying to find us. And we have feng shui people saying, oh, love the space. It's just great energy in here. Did you work out all the feng shui? And I'm like, nope.
It's just natural that way. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just a designer. I just designed it. That's it. That's it. So yes, there's a lot of that. So it is a difficult line to tread, because I don't want to send them just packing. I want to try and get them to engage with material that they mightn't otherwise engage with, and that's why I mentioned before, start them off on things to do with thinking. Start them off on stuff that will potentially get them to question their assumptions, and that's really hard. There's not a lot of material, I think, that can actually engage people who are hostile to thought.
Yeah. I first got to learn of you online, but we met in person at the Australian Skeptics Convention last year in Brisbane, where you were the official bookstore. What are some of the recommendations you have for people who are interested in good skeptical books?
There are so many.
That's a great thing to know, because I have so many people searching my site for them, so it's wonderful to know that someone says there's lots of them out there. What do you recommend first off?
Well, obviously, my number one choice for all things skeptical is still Demon Haunted World. It's just so beautifully written. I'd have to say that Martin Bridgestock's book, Beyond Belief, has got to be high up there too. It really engages with the material in quite a different way to Demon Haunted World, and it's, I think, a nice companion piece. I think the two work together quite well for reasons that I don't think would be immediately apparent. And Crimes Against Logic, the Jamie White book, that's a real number one book for thinking. It's a cracking little book.
I have to find that one. I haven't got that one, so I better make sure I order it from your site.
Oh, okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's very good. It's quite slim because, at the heart of critical thinking, logic is at the basis of that, and so and he's a terrific philosopher. He's got a couple of others, but I don't have them in stock at the moment. And Julian Bagini's work.
Oh, yes.
He's terrific. I really, really like him. He's just got a great voice. It's really contained, and it's not given to hyperbole. He really tries to keep things quite mellow. He's the mellow English philosopher who engages in tricky material, and I like reading. I've liked reading everything he's written. So one of his ones in particular is "Do You Think What You Think You Think?"
Yes,
that's a cracker. He's also done Philosophy Behind the Headlines, the Philosopher's Toolkit, and each of these are great for anyone who wants to engage in skepticism.
I even use The Pig Who Wishes to Be Eaten with my high school classes.
Oh, good. Very good. Yeah, it's a great book. Great book. So, yes, and there are a variety of others. A lot of the philosophers have written material that I would also suggest. So, A.C. Grayling is one of my favourites. Although it's not directly engaged in skepticism, he tends to deal more with things like secular humanist ethics and problems of ethical considerations and moral considerations. But he also engages in really modern material. So he's done work on collateral damage, for instance, during the war. Truth claims, and a lot of truth claims are made in ethical areas and moral areas, and skepticism traditionally does avoid them. And I think it traditionally avoids them primarily because it's really messy.
Yeah.
A.C. Grayling as a way to start thinking critically about ethical issues is my chosen author in that area.
Yeah. You were also recently at a humanist convention that happened in Queensland. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I was invited to be a speaker.
Wonderful. Yes. What did you talk about? What happened?
My topic was my talk was labelled "What Julia Said to Richard."
Ooh.
I don't know if you saw the Q&A a month or so ago, or a little bit ago, with Julia Bishop and Richard Dawkins on the show.
Yes, it's been featured online, and I've watched it again recently. Yes.
Yeah. So she was asked the question, "Do you believe in an afterlife?" And her response was along the lines of, "Well, I can't believe that this is it. Is this it? Is this all we have on Earth?"
Mm.
I am always amazed when I hear that sort of comment, even though I do tend to hear variations of that comment on a regular basis. And so I made my talk about answering that question. Is this it?
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed it, and the feedback was really good. It was my first attempt at public speaking.
Brilliant. Well done, you. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so that was good. And we had a little bookstall there as well, where I just featured more of our humanist stock as well as some of the critical thinking work. At that particular session, probably the best-selling book of the day was Bertrand Russell's Histories of Western Thought, or Histories of Western Philosophy. So
I got that one as a very young person when I first started my philosophy degree, and it's still a favourite of mine.
It is a cracker, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. If people go to your website, they can see a variety of other lectures that people have given at your bookstore, all free for viewing online.
One of our primary aims is to bring in thinkers, scientists, philosophers to the public that don't normally get to see them. And really, especially in an area like this, you don't really get people like the ones we get come and speak. So the last weekend we had Russell Blackford, who was also a speaker at the Atheist Convention, come and speak in the shop.
Yes.
And we were packed for that. We had about 65 people in the shop. Now, we can only really seat 45, so that was amazing. And that was great. And Russell was terrific. He gave a really good talk on sort of the history of things that are behind secular issues and secular philosophy, and why you might be interested in having a secular society even if you're religious. So that talk will be going online next week. We've also had Peter Ellerton, a Critical Thinking Award winner, along with Martin Bridgestock, Professor Ian Fraser, the great scientist at the Centre of Developing a Vaccine for Cervical Cancer.
Yeah.
Had Ian Lowe and a variety of environmental scientists and other authors who are engaged in scientific issues. So we video them, we put them online. We also try and include the questions that are actually asked of them in the audience, so that we can try and start getting a dialogue between people who view them locally and people who outside of the region who might be viewing it from overseas or somewhere else in Australia. So I would really like to be able to get that blog to be a focal point for conversation about those things, because you don't get videos of these things otherwise. I mean, where else are you going to find a 1 hour long video of Martin Bridgetop talking about skepticism? Absolutely brilliant. It's a wonderful place to see them. And you get to see what a beautiful bookstore you have. So if people do have the chance to come and see it, what's the actual address of it? We're in Noosa Ville. We're on Wyber Road, which is Weyba, 205 Wyber Road. We're just up the road from Aldi and next to Organica. So look for the two stores that are sort of looking sideways at each other and saying, yeah. And the website, of course, is embiggenbooks.com, isn't it? Yes, it is. I did have someone ask me about this. People can order online, read reviews online, contribute reviews online, as well as contribute to the blog, can't they? Indeedy, they can. We welcome reviews, particularly on these sorts of books that we've been talking about, the skeptical books, because it helps to have other people's views on these things. Each of the books have strengths and weaknesses, and they can be recommended under different circumstances, as we've seen. And even I've contributed a book review, but mine's a bit silly. No, and we've had some good reviews. Another great review, yours and Sean the Bloggernaut. Oh, yes. He's done a couple of cracking reviews for us as well. So, and he's due to deliver another, and I need to get on to him about that because he's a bit late. Yep. So if you're listening, Sean, which I'm certain you are, get moving on it. Yeah. Great. Okay. So people, head over to www.embiggenbooks.com and buy from you online. I think is an important thing. Let's see if we can encourage more rationalist bookstores out there to keep on thriving. Indeedy. Also, just to bear in mind that a large proportion of our profits, as small as they are, do simply go back into science outreach, because that's our MO. That's why we're here. If we can't increase scientific literacy in the community, then we're failing. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for talking to us, Warren. My pleasure.
Thanks again to Warren. If you would like to hear our monthly book reviews, head over to the Token Skeptic podcast at www.tokenskeptic.org. Warren's site is found at embiggenbooks.com.
Examining the truth and exposing the frauds, badpsychics.co.uk is the website that critically examines mediums, clairvoyants and psychics. Follow the controversies, news and discussions in the lively forum community.
And now you can download your weekly fix of Righteous Indignation, the official podcast of badpsychics.co.uk that talks hard and critically about the paranormal. badpsychics.co.uk, the UK's largest and most respected skeptical site looking at psychics.
Now it's time for Dr. Rachie Reports with Dr. Rachel Dunlop.
Hello listeners, and welcome to Dr. Rachie Reports. It may have come 12 years too late, but finally Andrew Wakefield, the doctor who sparked the worldwide controversy about the safety of the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella, has been struck off the UK Medical Register. The Wakefield investigation was the longest in the history of the General Medical Council in the UK, with the disciplinary panel sitting for a total of 148 days over a period of 2.5 years at an estimated cost of £1 million. The results of the investigation were revealed in a 143-page report on January the 28th, 2010, and they found that Wakefield showed a callous disregard for children suffering and abused his position of trust. And in a statement, the GMC determined that Dr. Wakefield's name should be erased from the medical register. And so this came to be on May the 25th, 2010. Now this decision follows an investigation into Wakefield's behaviour because of his publication that appeared in The Lancet in 1998. Now, although this publication itself did not make a link between MMR and autism, It was at a press conference after the paper was published where Wakefield first suggested this link. He urged caution and advised parents to seek out single vaccines for measles, mumps or rubella. So Wakefield's statements resonated worldwide, and this scared away many parents from vaccinating their children, and also firmly cemented the anti-vaccination movement. The resulting drop in vaccine compliance continues to contribute to outbreaks of vaccine-preventable diseases, and we have seen outbreaks of measles, whooping cough and mumps in recent months. So some of the findings from the GMC were that Wakefield was found to have brought the medical profession into disrepute, and this was in reference to him taking blood samples for the study from children who were attending his son's birthday party in return for £5 reward. Now, Wakefield was later filmed laughing and joking at a conference about the children fainting and vomiting. Here's what Wakefield had to say to Matt Lauer of the USA Today show with reference to this incident.
We needed some control blood from children who were entirely normal. And so I asked my children, and my wife said, we've got a birthday party coming up, we've got some medical friends, why don't we ask them if they'd be prepared to let their children do it too? So 7 or 8 children said, sure.
I don't know why that sounds funny to me, but it does. At a children's birthday party, blood samples being drawn from children, were they paid for the samples?
They were rewarded. They weren't paid.
How were they rewarded?
At the end of the party, they were given £5. At the time, I guess about $8.
Why isn't that paying them?
Well, it's not saying up front, by coercing them, you do this, we're going to give you money. It's saying at the end of it, here's a reward for helping.
It's completely ridiculous that Wakefield would expect this method of collecting samples for a study to be ethical and above board. He is either completely clueless when it comes to the strict procedures instructed by ethics committees, or he's completely incompetent. So in addition, Wakefield conducted unnecessary, painful and intrusive diagnostic treatments on children, and these included colonoscopies and spinal taps. Now, in further investigations, the Sunday Times journalist Brian Deere revealed that Wakefield did not disclose serious financial conflicts of interest. Now, Deere provided evidence that Wakefield was paid thousands of pounds by lawyers seeking a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. And Wakefield also had a patent on his own single measles vaccine, similar to the one he urged parents to seek out at the press conference following the publishing of the paper. So things began to crumble for Wakefield in 2004, when 10 of the 12 authors on the Lancet paper withdrew their names from the publication, stating, "We wish to make it clear that in this paper no causal link was established between MMR vaccine and autism, as the data were insufficient. However, the possibility of such a link was raised, and consequent events have had major implications for public health." So it took a further 6 years before the editor of The Lancet retracted the paper completely, which effectively means it is now scratched from the scientific record. And in another blow for Wakefield, another paper which was accepted for publication in the journal Neurotoxicology was also subsequently withdrawn. This study attempted to show a link between thimerosal and impaired neurological development in baby macaques. So in 2005, Wakefield relocated to the United States, where he established and became director of the Alternative Medicine Clinic for Children with Autism Spectrum Disorders, known as Thoughtful House. The clinic has come under fire for using questionable treatments such as chelation, a scientifically unproven therapy and dangerous therapy for autism. Wakefield was pressured into resigning his position following the GMC findings in January 2010. So despite recent events, the anti-vaccination movement continues to rally around their poster boy, and Wakefield's supporters have called the GMC findings unjust, a smear campaign, and a sad day for our children. Generation Rescue, which is a zealous anti-vaccination group in the US publicly represented by Jenny McCarthy, issued a statement of support following the findings in January. They said, "Dr. Andrew Wakefield is perhaps this debate's greatest hero. He's a doctor who has held onto the truth unbowed through pressure that would break most mortals. Dr. Wakefield's influence in saving other children from the fate that befell so many children is incalculable. More recently, comments left on the Age of Autism website were supporting calls for Wakefield to be knighted. So let's summarise the chain of events that led to Wakefield getting struck off on Tuesday. Wakefield was getting paid by lawyers putting together a class action suit against the manufacturers of MMR for 2 years prior to the publication of the Lancet paper. At a press conference following the publication of the paper, he called for parents to seek out a single vaccine for measles, and he himself had a patent on his own single measles vaccine. The pathology results in the Lancet paper cannot be verified and are suspected to be fabricated. The PCR data was found to have come from contaminated samples and could not be independently confirmed, and no conflicts of interest were declared when the paper was submitted. Wakefield did not have ethics approval for the studies on children, and the study was only small, consisting of 12 children. So for such a small study that did not even examine a vaccine's autism link, it is incredible to think that it had such a large impact on public health. But of course the blame does not solely lie with Wakefield. The media were highly complicit in spreading the fear about the MMR vaccine safety, and the results of their misinformation was MMR vaccination rates fell to as low as 50% in some parts of London. And although the anti-vaccination movement was well and truly active at this stage, it must be acknowledged that this boosted their cause. So it's incredible that even when this evidence is all lined up, people still continue to rally around Andrew Wakefield. But he is certainly keeping some unusual company these days. Recently he sat down with the king of natural medicine, Joseph McCullough, for a series of 5 interviews for YouTube. And a recent interview with Matt Lauer for USA Today was a very good example of how Wakefield now believes his own rhetoric and has completely jumped the shark.
The findings that we made originally have been replicated in 5 different countries of the world. So the bowel disease in these children exists. This is a little bump on the road, and that's how it should be perceived. It's a bump on a very bumpy road, but it's a bump. And what it does not detract from is the fact that there are millions of children out there suffering, and the fact that vaccines can cause autism. And that is a fact that's accepted by the American government, because they've been settling cases of vaccine-induced autism since 1991.
You say to me that the findings have been replicated. I have seen studies, several major studies. Your study involved 12 children. I've seen studies that involve hundreds of thousands of children that do not replicate your findings. And so today, will you sit across from me and tell me you still believe there is a possible link between that particular vaccine, the MMR vaccine, and autism in children?
Not only do I think it, but the American government has conceded that it exists. That causal relationship between vaccines and autism exists, and they've actually been secretly settling cases as early as 1991, out of court as well.
As you know, we've talked to people since we had a chance to meet you, and you were kind enough to sit down for that exclusive interview with us. And people in our government have said no. No, we no longer believe this. We went out and checked out the possibilities, and we no longer believe this to be true. And every doctor I've spoken to says it's dangerous. It's dangerous to even keep talking about it, because for every time you talk about it, parents stop vaccinating their children, and some children are dying from preventable illnesses.
Matt, you're missing the point. The point is that despite denying it in the public relations campaign that they waged against me and against the parents, they are conceding these cases in vaccine court.
What's your next step, real quickly?
My next step is to continue this work to its natural conclusion. These parents aren't going away, the children aren't going away, and I'm most certainly not going away.
So apparently Wakefield is not going away, but I wonder what the future will hold for him. He has recently written a book called Callous Disregard, detailing his side of the events leading to him being struck off. Maybe he can write some more works of fiction. At least he seems pretty good at making stuff up. He also claimed at an anti-vaccination rally in Washington last week that he plans to set up a virtual university where he will design studies and recruit researchers to do the work. As for this idea, well, no respectable journals or researchers are going to want to be in spitting distance of Andrew Wakefield. Although he does sit on the editorial board of Medical Veritas, an anti-vaccination conspiracy theory-laden publication. So perhaps we'll see his publications appearing here. Wakefield's colleague, Professor Walker Smith, a senior author on the Lancet study, has also been struck off the UK Medical Register. The other doctor under investigation, Professor Simon Murch, was found not guilty of professional misconduct. Smith and Wakefield have 28 days to appeal this decision, and Wakefield has indicated that he plans to do so. If you'd like to read more about this story or leave a comment, I've blogged it at skepticsbook.com. And until next time, this has been Dr. Rachie Reports.
We take you now to a conversation being shouted across a hillside.
What?
I said I'm trying to come up with a promo for this podcast.
What podcast?
The Geologic Podcast.
What?
The Geologic Podcast.
Oh, Harab's pointless meanderings, sceptical observations, ridiculous musical interludes, and not a hint of geology.
Well,
alright, maybe a little bit of geology, but it's not worth it.
Come on, he's got the religious moron of the week. Geo's mom reads Jay-Z lyrics.
Pointless.
Ask George.
Oh, who cares what the bastard thinks?
Interesting fauna.
Oh, great.
The horoscopes.
Garbage.
Not the Bible.
Boring garbage.
Misinformed science.
Stupid garbage.
True adventures of the Philadelphia Funk Authority.
Ooh, white Ukrainian boy playing drums in a funk band. Must be fascinating.
What, none of that is appealing?
Not even a wee bit.
Great. Don't tune in then.
I won't.
Fine.
Fine.
Great.
Great.
Fine.
Great.
Great.
You said that already.
Geologic Podcast. Pointless, but free. GeologicPodcast.com.
Well, thank you for listening to this week's Skeptic Zone. On next week's show, the think tank returns, and we might have some very special guests coming up soon. So stay tuned for that. Also, don't forget that tickets for TAM London go on sale on Saturday, May the 29th. And I've just found out that I'm going to be at a conference in Wyoming 2 days before TAM London starts. So I'm hoping I might be able to jump on a plane and make it all the way to TAM London. Now, don't forget, listeners, that several members of the Skeptic Zone are going to be at TAM 8 in Las Vegas, and that includes myself, Joe Benamu, Richard Saunders, and Iran Segev. So look out for us in Las Vegas. And finally, TAM Australia is still coming up in November this year, and tickets are going on sale very, very soon. So keep your eye on skeptics.com.au, or if you're on Twitter, you can follow at AustSkeptics. That's AustSkeptics. So that's all from me for this week's Skeptic Zone. And Richard, we hope you get better soon.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.
Skeptic Zone.